The sky hanging over Stalingrad was like a blood-stained, dirty bandage. The merciless cold of the winter of 1942 had frozen not only the skeletal ruins of the city, but the very souls of the living. In the midst of this apocalyptic landscape, a T-34 tank moved forward, growling like a wounded animal. Its metal hull was a tapestry of scars. Every scratch, every gouge was the silent signature of a death it had cheated, a fate it had defied. But the true soul of this steel beast was the man inside, Commander Ivan Petrov. For Ivan, the world had become nothing more than a narrow gray slit seen through his tank's periscope. The hell outside was a pale, ghostly light that filtered through this slit. Inside was his own personal hell, filled with the sharp stench of oil, sweat, gunpowder, and a relentless fear. This cramped metal box had once been a shelter, a womb that protected him from shrapnel. Now it was a coffin, and Ivan was its living ghost. Before the monster, there was a soldier. And before the soldier, there was a friend, a brother. His name was Dmitry. Dmitry was life's stubborn resistance against war. He was the polar opposite of Ivan's hard and silent nature, a ray of sunlight that pierced through his bleak world. Even all the darkness of war, there was an unquenchable sparkle in his eyes, a joke always ready on his lips. Even the others in the tank, Pavel, the experienced and grumpy driver, and Mikhail, the quiet gunner, secretly drew strength from Dmitry's endless cheerfulness. In the dim light of the tank, Dmitry's face would light up as he read a letter from his sister for the 100th time. "Anya asks again, is that grumpy commander of yours taking good care of you?" he'd say with a laugh. I wrote back, "That grumpy commander saves my life every day. So you stop worrying and knit me some wool socks." Then he would turn to Ivan. "When this is over, Ivan, I'm taking you to our village. You'll eat my mother's piroshki. You'll meet Anya's friends. You'll see what a real life is." "Finish the war first, dreamer," Ivan would grumble, but the faintest hint of a smile would touch the corners of his eyes. "Pavel, listen to the engine. It sounds like it's sputtering again." This was their ritual, Dmitry's unwavering hope for the future, Pavel's experienced complaints about everything, and Ivan's unshakable discipline that checked every detail. Together they survived in this steel womb. The vow they made to each other was as real as their ammunition, as solid as their armor. They would walk out of this hell together. But Stalingrad had no respect for vows. That day, the sky was lower and more leaden than ever before. They were ambushed in the courtyard of a factory on the city's outskirts. When a German anti-tank shell screamed off their armor and shattered their left track, their tank was left stranded like a helpless turtle in the snow. Bullets whizzed around them, and mortars rained down death. "The track is gone. We're immobilized," Ivan yelled into the intercom, his voice lost in the screech of metal. "Someone has to go out and see." There wasn't a moment of hesitation in Dmitry's eyes. This was the mission. This was survival. "I'll go, Commander. You give me covering fire. Mikhail, silence that machine gun nest. You won't even have time to miss me before I'm back." Those would be his last words. Ivan watched through his periscope as Dmitry unlatched the hatch and leapt out into the gray world. With the agility of a cat, he used the tank's hull as cover and crouched down toward the track. In that moment, time dilated, each second stretching into an eternity. Ivan's heart beat erratically, like the sputtering engine Pavel was cursing at. He imagined a German sniper in the broken window of a building miles away. He could almost feel the sniper holding his breath, aligning the crosshairs on Dmitry's helmet, the millimeter of soft pressure his finger applied to the trigger.
Then came the sound, not the chaotic symphony of battle, but a single sharp and personal crack. Through the periscope, Ivan saw Dmitry's body stiffen for a moment, the tools falling from his hands into the snow. Then he collapsed like a lifeless sack. On the pure white snow, a bright, warm, and impossibly vivid red stain appeared, spreading quickly like an artist's brushstroke. Something inside Ivan's brain snapped. The world went silent. Pavel's scream of, "He's hit! They got Dmitry!" and Mikhail's frantic, senseless yells into the radio all faded into a distant whisper. The only thing he could see was that red stain. The stain where Dmitry's life, his hopes, his letters to Anya, and his dreams of a violin player in Moscow were now draining away. For a moment he was in denial. He's just wounded, he thought. He'll get up now. But Dmitry did not get up. That bullet hadn't just killed Dmitry. It had ripped the man out of Ivan Petrov. All that was left was the coldness of steel and a scorching, blind rage that vowed to fill the emptiness. The days following Dmitry's death were an endless twilight. Ivan no longer spoke. He only gave orders. His voice was like the screech of rusted metal. His eyes were as expressionless as the surface of a frozen lake. The young loader assigned to replace Dmitry, a boy named Sasha, was terrified of him. Sasha had grown up on stories of war, on heroic anthems, but the man in front of him was like no hero from those stories. In this commander's eyes, he saw death itself. Ivan no longer fought for the motherland. He didn't care about strategy or orders. He was now a hunter, and his prey was anything with a swastika on it. His tank had become an extension of his vengeance. He moved through the ruins of the city like a phantom, ambushing and hunting German panzers. He ignored Pavel's warnings of, "Commander, it's madness, there's an ambush there," and disregarded Mikhail's hesitations. Every exploding enemy tank was like a shot of morphine, numbing his pain for a fleeting moment. But when the numbness wore off, the void inside was bigger and darker than before. One afternoon, moving through the ruins of the Red October factory, Ivan spotted a Panzer IV in the distance. It was one of the types that had been in the area the day Dmitry was killed. Maybe it was the same one. A switch flipped in Ivan's mind. It had to be. "Pavel, full speed ahead," he commanded. "But Commander," Pavel's muffled voice argued over the intercom, "that's open ground. It's crawling with anti-tank nests. Our orders are to hold position." "I said forward," Ivan roared. His voice was so savage that Sasha flinched. Pavel hesitated for a second, then swore and threw the tank forward. The T-34 burst from its cover and charged into the debris-filled square. Instantly, fire rained down on them. A shell ricocheted off the armor with a horrific scream, and the inside of the tank rang like a bell. Sasha froze in fear for a moment, nearly dropping the shell in his hands. "Load!" Ivan screamed, his eyes locked on his prey through the periscope. They survived that day by sheer luck and Pavel's skill. They sent the Panzer to hell, but their own tank took heavy damage and had to limp back to their lines. After that day, Sasha could never quite look Ivan in the eyes again, because he hadn't seen a commander in that moment, but a monster, a beast that would throw its own crew into the fire without a second thought.
At night, when everyone else was asleep or trying to get warm by a fire, Ivan would be alone. He would lean against the cold metal of his tank and pull out the worn, frayed photograph of him and Dmitry from his pocket. In the photo, on a summer day, by the river in their village, stood two young men with their arms around each other. He remembered that moment. Dmitry had fallen in trying to save his hat, and Ivan had laughed at him for hours. He could still feel the warmth of that laughter, the heat of that summer sun on his skin. In those moments, the monster's mask would crack for an instant, and a single tear would trace a path down Ivan's stony face. "Forgive me, brother," he would whisper to the frozen wind. "I couldn't protect you, but I swear I will send them all to join you." That tear was the last remnant of his frozen soul. But with the dawn, the tear would dry up and the mask would be back in place. This dark hunt continued until that one day, the day that would change everything. He had a German Panzer III cornered in a narrow alley. It was a masterful maneuver, a perfect trap. It had nowhere to run. It was an easy kill. Adrenaline surged through his veins as he centered the cannon. His finger was on the firing button. A cruel smirk, the smirk of a wolf closing in on its prey, formed on his lips. Right at that moment, at the peak of his victory and vengeance, he heard it. A thin, high-pitched sound that cut through the noise of the engine, the screams and the explosions. The cry of a baby. The sound was coming from a half-demolished apartment building right next to the Panzer. Ivan froze. His finger hovered over the button. The sound was so out of place, so impossible in the middle of this hell. For a moment, he thought he was losing his mind, hearing the whispers of ghosts in the frozen steel. "Fire, Commander! What are you waiting for?" Sasha yelled over the intercom. But Ivan could only hear the crying. It was the sound of the children in Dmitry's dreams, the sound of the life that was supposed to be lived after the war. That sound pierced through the hatred and rage that had been building up inside him for weeks like a knife. The monster within him roared, "Fire! This is your revenge for Dmitry." But beneath the monster's roar, he heard another voice, a whisper he had long silenced. It was the voice of the old Ivan, the voice of Dmitry's best friend, the man who had dreams. That baby's cry created a moment of silence in the deafening noise of hatred, and in that silence, Ivan saw everything again. He saw Dmitry's blood on the snow, but he also saw his smile before the war. He understood that the men in that cornered tank were not just uniforms, they were someone's Dmitry. Killing them wouldn't bring his friend back. It would only add new links to this meaningless chain of death.
"Ceasefire," he whispered into the intercom. His voice was tired and broken. "Kill the engine." To the utter shock of Sasha and Pavel, Ivan unlatched the commander's hatch and slowly pulled himself out. He was unarmed. He stood on top of his tank, exposed and vulnerable to all enemy fire. There was a moment of tense silence. Then he raised his hand and made a sign to the German tank. He was asking them to surrender. The hatch of the German tank creaked open. The soldier who emerged was a boy, even younger than Sasha, with not the marks of war, but of pure terror on his face. As he raised his hands in the air, Ivan saw his own exhaustion, his own despair in the boy's eyes. He was not an enemy. He was another victim dragged into this hell against his will. In that moment, Ivan did not take his revenge. He did something far harder, far braver. He showed mercy, not to his enemy, but to his own soul. The final days of the battle came.
It was no longer bombs falling on Stalingrad, but the first rains of spring. Stubborn blades of grass and the first flowers were pushing their way through the ruins. Ivan sat on the front of his tank, looking at the old photograph in his hand. The icy expression on his face had melted, replaced by a deep sorrow, but also an indescribable peace. Sasha sat down next to him and offered him a piece of bread. "That day, why didn't you fire, Commander?" he asked, finally voicing the question he had held inside for months. Ivan looked up from the photograph and toward the horizon. A timid sun was shining over the city. Because, he said slowly, if I had destroyed that tank, they wouldn't have been the only ones to die inside it. Whatever was left of me would have died with them." A real smile appeared on his face for the first time in years. Tired, sad, but real. "I think I've seen enough death." Ivan Petrov did not return from Stalingrad a hero. Medals did not adorn his chest. He came out of that war simply as a survivor. But more importantly, he emerged as a man who had conquered the monster he had locked in the heart of steel, and who had pulled his own humanity out from under the rubble. Because sometimes the greatest victory is not in destroying your enemy, but in refusing to let the hatred destroy you.